Salute family and welcome back to another video. This is Black Truth United. I was recently in a Twitter space with a few people in the black grassroots who shall go unnamed, and we were going back and forth as far as whether or not an anti-black hate crime bill / law is something worth pushing for. And to be honest, I was kind of surprised because I thought that this was common knowledge in the black grassroots, but I guess it's not. So I decided to address this topic in this video. So the first thing I want to debunk is the fact that the US government supposedly can't do things for one specific group. Now, this doesn't mean that there won't be legal scrutiny, there won't be lawsuits, and scum and others may crawl out of the woodworks to try to challenge this or that, but that's up to our legal experts to make sure that the language is tight, whether that's using a status, whether that's using a historical event. The point is, it is possible to get laws passed specifically for one group of people. It does it all the time. Let me give you a few examples. We all know about the Japanese internment camps. Those who were interned, even if not 100% of them were Japanese, the bill was made specifically for Japanese Americans who were aggrieved. Native American groups, tribes get all kinds of resources all the time. Here's a recent example of lands being allocated to this particular tribe that Clyde Bum was fighting for. You can read about it on your screen. Even if you look at outside of America, specific nation states are given resources which exclude other groups. A recent example that Brother Church and others in the new black media have pointed out is the town of Curious Joel, an all-Jewish village that's receiving crazy amounts of federal funds, state funds, local funds, all while claiming poverty. These are resources earmarked for a specific group. So laws and policies and funding can in fact go to specific groups, status-based groups. However you want to say it, the point is groups can exclude others who do not fit their criteria. Hell, there has to be a criteria or else everyone and their mother would claim every single ethnicity, every single religion, every single historical event. There have to be exclusionary tactics used in order to determine who is eligible. It's really only when it comes to us that people start making statements like, we have to make something for everyone, we can't exclude anyone. And that's coming out of the same vein as the cowardly use of black and anything. For example, black and people of color, black and minorities, black and this or that. It's pretty much watering down whatever is supposed to be earmarked for us. And we all know what happens when other groups are included. They get damn near all of the funding, all of the resources, all the benefits, and we're left with the stigma, just like with DEI. But I digress. Now we're going to cover part of what was discussed in the space, which was the COVID Hate Crimes Act. Now, many of us know this act as simply the Antiasian Hate Crime Bill, and that's with good reason. So let's take a look at the actual bill. So here's the bill, and as you can see, by just using Control F, Control Find, the bill is riddled with the word Asian, not the word Freedmen, but Asian. Now, even if you want to say that later on in the act it adds everyone to the list, you still can't deny that specific wording was used to single out this particular group and make sure that their needs were addressed. My question is, why can't foundational Black Americans have the same language? We actually need stronger language. But why can't we get an anti-black hate crime bill that specifically uses our federally recognized term of freedmen, acknowledging the crazy disparities and the fact that we are the #1 victims of hate crimes and have been historically neglected not only by our local governments, but also the state and federal government. Now check this part out specifically. The United States condemns and denounces any and all anti-Asian and Pacific Islander sentiment in any form. Well, I'll be damned. Where is this for us? Even if you say that this bill is for everyone, there's no denying that this bill at least caters primarily to this specific group of Asian and Pacific Islanders. Now let's get into the funding, because unlike lovey-dovey, heartfelt, marshmallow, stuffed mumbo jumbo that they try to give us with no tangible policies, no teeth, no deadlines, and no enforcement mechanisms, This specific bill comes with resources, grants specifically distributed to the states. This includes hotlines as well as other earmarked funds. Now, when we dig into the funds allocated to different states, let's see what we find. Here's one example. California received 10% of the federal funds to curb hate crimes. Ends up doing this, giving money to churches, pastors, all kinds of stuff. But notice at the very end of the article it states, anti-black hate crimes decreased, though they were still the most prevalent. Don't let these people try to fool you into thinking they don't know that we are the #1 victims of hate crimes. They've known it, and some of them are the very perpetrators of the hate crimes. But to be honest, this article was a little vague, so I did some more digging. And look what I found out. Governor Newsom signed the Asian Pacific Islander Equity Budget in 2021. Funding the grants at the urging of the state's Asian American and Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. Early grants primarily went to organizations serving that community, not all communities, not the community that's the #1 victim of hate crimes, but that community. Then, of course, at the end, just like in the other article, at the very end, they leave some BS excuse about why black organizations didn't receive that funding. There's a lot of talk, there's a lot of yapping that these politicians do, but at the end of the day, who's getting the funds? When we talk about the Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill or the COVID-19 Hate Crime Bill, those funds are going to the states who are distributing them, similar to how the states and local governments used to distribute land grants and farmer assistance. They would give them to corrupt local governments with a whole bunch of people who knew how to better exclude us from getting those tangibles. And I have no doubt that if you did enough digging, you'd probably find one or two organizations here or there that were quote unquote black that received funding, likely connected to boule groups. But the fact of the matter is this. The law was specifically written with language emphasizing anti-Asian hate. And more importantly, when you look at who received the funds, early grants primarily went to organizations serving that community. All the religious groups and organizations that they had in the other article were tantamount to a poorly made smokescreen. Alright, now that we covered the funding and the crux of the Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill, aka the COVID-19 Hate Crime Bill, I want to remind everyone of the context behind that bill being produced. And this is very important. This is not to be overlooked because almost every significant bill that you can think of had us attached to it in one way or another, specifically to be victimized by it. Let me give you a few examples. The Mann Act, infamously used against Jack Johnson, claiming he was trafficking women. Biden's law, responsible for giving funding to the states, notice a pattern here, in order to enforce laws which specifically targeted our community. Disparities through the roof, and all that racialized language that Biden was using back in the day. Let's go to Roe versus Wade. This is a lesser known one. I'm not going to pull up entire articles and everything for this. You can research this in your free time. But yes, Roe versus Wade was established based on a lie that some W women got SA by black men. That's how they were able to get this law passed. And this is no secret. Congress knows that the quickest way to get a bill passed is to make sure it targets FBAs in a negative manner, typically by framing us as criminals. So let's see if the Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill followed the same pattern. This is important to remind you of. You had, for the most part, melanated tethers committing random acts of violence against Asians, and they tried to pin that on us. You also had the mysterious pink hoodie wearers, who many suspect were linked to government agencies and specifically sent to drum up anti-Asian hate optics of black people being bad, attacking Asians. Well, we know damn well that's not the case. And let me add on here, allegedly, just so no one gets any ideas. They also use the celebrity class against us, telling us to do better. They got their favorite pet Negroes to show up, singing their tune, denouncing anti-Asian hate. So It's no surprise that they've got what they wanted. Just like almost any significant legislation that has passed, we were made to be the boogeyman so that this law would pass. Now ask yourself a question. If the propaganda surrounding this bill was specifically framing us as the perpetrators of the crime, how could this hate crime bill truly be for the benefit of us? Just something to think about. Now I'm going to play a video from Professor Black Truth, and in this video he specifically talks about pushing for an anti-black hate crime law. So let's give it a shot, but first I want to say fair use. Fair use. This is for teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use.
This morning's briefing dovetails off of last night's in that it illustrates why we have to take a harder line on fighting anti-black racism, in this case, fighting for an anti-black hate crime law. And that includes not just thugs on the street who attack us, but also making sure that these thugs with badges also get hit with the law as well. You have right-wing nuts who are banning history books and pushing anti-black propaganda, saying that slavery was beneficial to the black people who suffered under it. Meanwhile, in Europe, you have grants, not loans, but grants, being given by multiple governmental agencies to educate people about which of their ancestors, which is parents and grandparents in this case, were thought to have collaborated with the Nazis 80 years ago.
What did I tell you about grants? That's funding allocated specifically for a particular group. For those who don't know, grants do not need to be repaid. They're, for lack of a better term, chunks of free money allocated with a specific purpose.
And this is a public archive. This is going to be something that's going to be open to the public and will be used freely to point the fingers at people. Now, where are the efforts at to archive and publicize the names of anti-black racists who took part in lynchings or in the numerous genocides that took place where entire black towns were destroyed and their residents slaughtered? Where's the money for that?
My thoughts exactly. Where's the money for us? It's not enough to just say you're protected under the law. We need to know that there are resources at our disposal, just like the Asians got primarily for them. We saw that wording in California. We need to know that there's an enforcement arm and actual tangibles tied to the words of denouncing anti-black hate. You can call it symbolic, you can call it whatever you'd like, but whatever the Asians got, hey, make sure that we get that. Whatever all these other groups are getting that we're practically excluded from, just like the case of Curious Joel, just like the countless cases of Native Americans, many of which are $5 Native Americans. We need earmarked funds. We need earmarked laws specifically for protecting us.
Applying the pressure for the policies we require means that we have to talk about these things and talk about them frequently. That's how we put reparations on the map. We have to resolve within ourselves that we will no longer be held hostage to whether or not everybody else is perfectly pleased with us speaking up for what we are owed and for what it is that we need. The reason that reparations got put on the map is because we stopped caring who didn't like us bringing it up. If they were uncomfortable about it, then so be it. We're still going to be demanding what it is that we're supposed to have. We are not just the primary victims of hate crimes in America, we're the majority of hate crimes victims in this country. And many of these hate crimes are carried out by governmental agents to begin with. Making an anti-black hate crime bill one of our demands is right up there with reparations, is the kind of thing that we have to also add to the list that we mention it frequently. But promoting an anti-black hate crime bill is also helpful in another regard. It's because these Negroes who white power installs in these governmental political positions, they can't openly oppose an anti-black hate crime bill like they did a reparations bill under the guise, oh, it's a lot of money, and this is just some far-left claptrap, and it's sloganizing like nigga Jim Clyburn says.
This is an extremely important point right here. They cannot openly oppose an anti-black hate crime bill. When you bring that up and you show that Asians specifically got all that wording, which pretty much no one was against, you cannot then turn around and say, yeah, it was good for the Asians, but not for you blacks. It's a PR disaster, and one that we should be utilizing against these political scumbags.
They can't get out there and cheerlead against it. So instead what they'll try to do is they'll just refuse to even talk about it. But the truth of the matter is they can't openly get out there and say, this is a bad idea. This is just far left nonsense. You're going to cost us elections. They can't do that. This is something that they would be terrified to speak against, which is why we have to hold their feet to the fire and we have to make sure that we put their backs to the wall. They can't try to dismiss it with a weak, feeble dodge like, it's politically unpopular. But at the same time, they can't afford to speak up for it either. It's a catch-22, and we should make sure we handcuff them to it.
Exactly. This is one of the main reasons why we must continue to push for an anti-black hate crime bill. And you can use Freedmen or any other status-based term that would be more legally viable, but the point is we need it and we deserve it.
Other groups have advocates, but that's because their demands are sanctioned by the government. Ours are not. But understand, no matter how pervasive these other groups claim the hatred against them may be, it's still nothing compared to us. The reason I began pushing the phrase anti-black racism so hard was because of the ADL, believe it or not. Their name means Anti-Defamation League, but up until about 15 or 20 years ago, they had been known as the Jewish Anti-Defamation League. They dropped the Jewish at some point in the last 15 years, and yet their positions on the issues, their demands, and who they advocate for have remained exactly the same. See, when there's something other groups want, they are very specific about it, because they want to ensure that their demands, and hence the policies that they want, don't get watered down by including everyone else. And also, they want to make sure they get what they're after. And you know what? I don't really have a problem with that, so long as we get what we're after.
Exactly. The Anti-Asian Hate Crime Bill is not necessarily a negative. It's actually a positive because it exposes the hypocrisy in the system. And just like with all these illegal alien groups that popped over and got all these resources, some of us were paying attention and writing things down. Because when they come around later on saying, oh, look, we don't have this, we don't have that, and we can't do this, we've got a whole entire list of the things they were willing to do for those specific groups, resources and funding that we could not get access to. Notice a theme here.
And nobody stands in our way. Our list of people who have committed anti-black racist crimes against us, from discrimination to mass murders, is larger than anyone else. And not only is there not any sort of list of these criminals, but the government here has been actively protecting them from prosecution, and nobody abroad calls out for them to be punished either. What the Claims Conference is doing is, as their name implies, laying the groundwork for another round of reparations payments from those Dutch countries, not because the Dutch were the architects of the final solution per se, but because some of their citizens may have collaborated or merely sympathized with the ones who were. And this is a group based out of the U.S. who's leading this effort. Well, we have every right to be heard on this. But we're not going to be doing any studies or taking any opinion polls or mounting any surveys for what it is that we're owed. We're not concerned with what anybody else thinks when it comes to the policies we require. The ability to punish those who would harm us is a crucial form of power. And like I've always said, power is far too important to be put up to a vote.
Speaking of votes, I want to point this out. Out of the 95 people who voted, only one said nay to passing this bill. Now, how many people under the sound of my voice think that these numbers would stay the same if the language was geared toward primarily allocating resources specifically to us, denouncing any and all anti-black, anti-FBA freedmen, whatever term you want to use, hate? Do you think these numbers would be the same? This is the importance of pushing for an anti-black hate crime law. It allows us to expose the hypocrisy in the system. And after it passes, if it's packed with the language that we want it packed with, we'll have more practical ways of combating anti-black hate. So hopefully this video has been helpful. There's no way we're going to stop advocating for an anti-black hate crime law. And don't let anyone shame you for demanding what is rightfully owed, whether that's reparations or this anti-black hate crime law. So feel free to leave a productive comment in the comment section. Be sure to like and subscribe. And with all that being said, be one and be blessed, family. Peace.